All right, this is Will Tchakirides. I'm interviewing Edward Robinson for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is 1:20 p.m. on December 17th, 2025, and this interview is being recorded at KPVU 91.3 FM in Prairieview, Texas. All right, how are you doing today, Mr. Robinson?
A little exhausted. It's holiday season, but we're doing great.
Beautiful. Before I get into my questions, I'm just going to have you state your full name for the record here and tell me what your relationship is to KPVU.
Sure. My name is Eddie Robinson, Jr. I am the general manager of KPVU Radio, also professor in our College of Arts and Sciences division here at Prairieview A&M, the Department of Language and Communications.
Is it okay if I call you Eddie during this interview?
Yes, please. Please call me Eddie.
All right, Eddie. Tell me when you were born and where you were born.
I was born in the beautiful city of Jackson, Mississippi in 1972, November 27th.
And, you know, if we were in the movie of your life, paint a picture for me of what Jackson was like. If that's the place you grew up, if you moved around, describe those places too. But, you know, what would I see? What would I smell? What would it feel like in that place?
With regards to Jackson, that was actually the hospital location. My parents lived in Macomb, Mississippi, which is about 80 miles south of Jackson. So when I was born, they went back home in Macomb, and I think at that time they were living in a trailer, and you know we were I was the only child, and I remember vividly being in that trailer for a few years. My dad was working as a railroad operator. He was working in that particular industry. It was very popular back in Macomb in those days in the early 70s. And my mother worked as she was going to school at Southwest Community College in that area in Summit, Mississippi. So if I can kind of think back in terms of childhood, I could smell for some reason the aroma of cinnamon, baked goods. My mother used to love baking. The place was just, packed with all kinds of food, and my mother loved to cook. The color of maroon, beige, brown, all of that is just sort of coming to my mind right now when I think of my childhood, when I think of what I was surrounded by. And I think for the most part, it was surrounded by a little small compact radio. And my father would always have music playing in the background. And I remember AM stations, and they played music like Stevie Wonder, some old school R&B, but it was also like yacht rock. We're talking Toto. We're talking music like Lee Ritenour. Really like old school yacht rock. Air Supply, Christopher. What's his name? Christopher from Sailing.
Cross.
Christopher Cross.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, that kind of sort of like feeling, if you will, because it was very laid back. It was a sort of really, aesthetic. Really the aesthetic was very, very sort of relaxed and laid back. And Dad came in. He was tired. I would always kind of, look forward to him coming home. All of that. That's pretty much that childhood environment. Yeah.
Excellent. And I want to get back to those early experiences of radio and where those led you.
Sure.
But, dive a little bit deeper into the stories of the people who raised you. I think you said you're an only child.
I was.
But
and still am.
But tell me where your parents come from, their ancestry. Are they native to Mississippi? Like how far can you trace it back, and what is that migration story, if there is one?
I really didn't know much about my father's family, though we did visit them quite often in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which is not too far from Macomb. But my mother's side of the family was huge. She had, quite a few brothers and sisters, though what was more fascinating in my mind was my grandparents, my grandfather particularly, because he grew up in a time where he served in the military. I remember him going to World War II, but he had 11 brothers, and all total, it was 12 of them. Every last one of them went into the military, except for one, if I'm not mistaken. But we're talking like a black version of Saving Private Ryan. And I was always fascinated by my grandfather and everything that he accomplished and what he did. He was very instrumental in civil rights, in the civil rights movement with his wife, my grandmother, Dorothy Nobles, Ernest Nobles. They held hand in hand, eliminating Jim Crow laws all within that area of Macomb. He worked with several other leaders within that Macomb community. Will, to just be really honest with you, Macomb, Mississippi was known as the bombing capital of the world. I mean, when you think of that, and it's the world, not even just like America, but it was the bombing capital of the world. There's one particular friend of the family, Anjanou Ellis Taylor, who's an actress. I spoke to her many, many times, and she still lives in Mississippi, actually, not too far from where my mother lives. And her grandfather, the church that her grandfather started, was bombed. So we're talking, very incredibly violent. My grandfather owned a dry cleaning establishment. Many, many times they were threatened to be bombed, but he would use Noble's Cleaners as an area where the SNCC, the SNCC community organization that he was a part of, and a lot of other leaders within the civil rights era at that time in Mississippi, they would use the Nobles Brothers Cleaners facility as hiding spots and hiding places from the Ku Klux Klan. I was always fascinated by all the stories that they would share with regards to all of that back in the 60s. And it just really just fascinated me, and I felt honored that their DNA of that fight, that sense of we're persevering no matter what. All of that drive, that intensity, that endurance was part of my DNA, and I felt incredibly, incredibly honored to have them as my family, looking at all of their history and what they went through, and it actually helped me moving forward through my grade school and high school, especially high school experiences, because growing up, I found myself fighting for an education, fighting for a way of building a future for myself. And I distinctively remember my parents, especially particularly my mother, really making sure that I had what I needed as far as, not just, books and supplies and resources, the financial support, but also that mentality, that mental toughness. Even my father, making sure that, I knew what was really at stake if I didn't perform or if I didn't, do my chores or something of that nature. But they were always, very, very strong on academics.
And what was at stake? How did you understand what the stakes were at that time?
Being in Mississippi, and they knew, that I had to I had to fight for what I believed in, and that was making sure that I could pursue my dreams, my goals, my aspirations if I made an effort in scoring all A's. And they really painted that picture very, very early, even in the early grade school. They were always pushing academics, always pushing books, always making sure that I would read the latest kind of book that was out, autobiography of Malcolm X. We're talking Kwanzaa Kunjufu. I mean, really massive books about freedom and making sure that I had book smarts, because we're talking the state of Mississippi. At one point, Will, I was really embarrassed of telling people that I was from Mississippi, because it felt like it was an area where that it wasn't much education. People were dumb and people weren't very they weren't educated, and so I felt like I needed to not only prove myself to the world, especially the schools and stuff that I came from, because at that time there were we were all, my parents were the ones that had those segregated schools, but by the time I got to school in Mississippi, a lot of them was integrated, and we were still, even though many of the schools that I attended, from junior high and middle school and even in the high school, even though we were all probably 50-50 blacks and whites, it just still seemed as if it was unspoken, this separate but equal sort of mentality. Even as early as when I became a senior in high school, there were incidents, even our prom, where we had separate proms. The blacks had their proms and the whites had theirs. And it wasn't until I became our class president of our high school, and I said to myself, and I said to them as well, we are not having separate proms. And I remember one of the reunions that we had with our high school, a teacher was there, and she basically said, I really applaud the class of 91, because you all stood up as one of the few classes who had enough of that separation of and that divisiveness of students wanting to do one thing based on their race. And I felt like we needed to do something with our class to come to some sort of to go to school together, to work together, to do all kind of things. I know my mother, and to give you an example, I was performing at one of our school plays, our productions. I can't remember what the name of the play was. It might have been Paint Your Wagon or something. But there was an incident or a line that I would say in that musical piece where I played this mayor, and the mayor's line was, "There's no jackass like our jackass." And the crowd, the students that surrounded me, they were the ones that were yelling this and saying that phrase. And that was really sort of like an incident that really stood out to me, because after I would say my line or something, and it was a really funny line, the whole student body, not many blacks, of course, that were performing, the crowd looked at me and they were basically yelling out, "There's no jackass like our jackass." And my mother was in the audience, and I could look at her face when that moment happened. She was livid. As soon as the production was over, she ran to the director, the head director of that play, and she just went ballistic on her. What gives you the right to put my child in something like this. I didn't think anything of it until it happened, and in that moment. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I'm the only black in this production, and they're calling me a jackass. And it really gave me a sense of pride on some level, but also a sense of knowing that, you know what, I need to fight. I need to do a little bit more to ensure that my future matters, because no one else is gonna do anything about it except myself. I mean, except for me. And I noticed that when my mother and my father were really kind of looking at things in a certain way, and I wasn't really kind of computing all of it, but through their experiences and what they've went through, really just sort of painted a very interesting picture to me of what Mississippi represented, who those people that were involved in the politics of the state, what they were all about. And that's what I mean when I'm coming to you about what the stakes are.
Well, let me add a little context to where you're from, Macomb, Mississippi, right? This, you mentioned SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. This was the location of their very first voter registration drive, right?
That's right.
And, you're mentioning it being the site of the most bombings in the world, right? That's warfare. That's warfare on black people who are striving to garner an education in their civil rights in this space. I mean, the reason why there are bombings is because of the freedom fight that is happening in your community.
Exactly.
So, take me into even more detail. What are how are your parents understanding the role of their parents and of you, because you mentioned your grandparents offering safe harbor to SNCC activists when they came through for these kinds of voter registration drives. Just tell me a little bit more about how your parents were civil rights activists or understood the freedom struggle and used it in the means that they best could use it.
My parents were very instrumental as well, and particularly my mother. She grew the afro. She was a part of, or at least I think she wanted to be a part of the Black Panther movement. My grandfather and grandmother knew the issues surrounding that particular group, that particular organization, though they were very, very supportive of them on some level. But I knew my mom in particular was just this hardcore, I don't take any mess, and you better not mess with any of my children, so to speak. I mean, because she not only did she have one child, myself, but she was also a Sunday school teacher. We were very instrumental in our church and our functions there. And with her being a Sunday school teacher, she felt like she wanted to protect all the students of her Sunday school class. And because she taught like the young adults, or at least sort of like the emerging adults in that class, and the youth of the church, she was a part of that. So I think when you mention civil rights and the church and that function, all of that was incorporated in the DNA of my parents, brought down from my grandparents. One incident that I do want to bring to light was my father, who always believed in reward, recognition. If you work hard, you will definitely get rewarded. And he wanted to ensure that provided this incentive, even though it was rough, it was hard. We were trying to make ends meet. He did want to share, the thinking behind the fact that it's not all intense. We could all celebrate, and we could all celebrate our accomplishments. And he was always a stickler to that. But one incident in particular, we went on this reward trip and decided to go to the local McDonald's for an ice cream. I can't remember what I did in school. It was something, I may have been like 6 or 7 at the time, but I cannot take this incident out of my mind because it's so intense. We went inside the McDonald's, and it's still there, right there in downtown Macomb. It was a very busy summer visit. We were in the lobby area trying to place our order, and we made it to the counter, and no one would take our order. Or at least I knew my father was standing there, and no one wanted to help him or do anything. Yeah, it was quite a few people inside there, but it was obvious that no one wanted to help us. Long story short, he got very irritated, asked to speak to the manager. They didn't want to give him the manager, but finally the manager did show up. And it got so intense that they actually even called the police. I'm standing there like, with tears, because I didn't really know what was happening, but I knew something was going on based on my skin color. And that moment, I think, really transformed my way of thinking with regards to looking up to my parents, looking up to them with a sense of, man, they really are looking for my best interests here. They really know, or at least they've experienced certain things in their lives that I know they're making sure that I don't experience. But every single time something would occur, they were always there to ensure that someone either paid the price, or someone was accountable, or someone was someone needed to know. And they were always, making sure that they connected with the leaders of the town. They always made sure that my grandparents knew what was going on. So they would voice themselves over at City Hall to ensure that they knew what was happening. They didn't want to shut up. They didn't want to keep quiet. I remember another incident where I was pulled over by the police, though I was coming from band practice. I may have been like as a 11th grader or something in high school. I was pulled over, and that was the first time and quite possibly the only time that I was pulled over by the police for not doing anything. I was told by my father the right way to ensure that I don't move, put my fingers in the 10-2. All of that, we went over all of these steps, these instructions of what to do as a young black man in Macomb. And again, he just wanted to profile me. He didn't know what was going on, why I was out so late at night. Again, I was coming from band practice. It was, I think, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. But he was just wondering why I was out in the streets,
sun was down. Yeah,
the sun was down. Right. So they were always there to help guide me through, my parents, and I'm grateful, so grateful for them for having that.
And how did you? Yeah, you mentioned your parents speaking up at sort of a city council meeting, and I know that Macomb, like back in the early days of SNCC, right? It was the mayor was a leader of the White Citizens Council, and the Klan was very present. So, like, how did you see your community change over time through your experience in the 70s and 80s? This post-civil rights moment, but still very much remnants of Black power and Black cultural pride are still within the community and within the ether. Like, what are you seeing change about the community that you grew up in those decades? As
I was growing up. Mm-hmm. Well, my parents made sure, Will, that I needed to get out of Mississippi. Mm-hmm. They made that known early. And when I got into the 10th grade in high school, and even in the 11th grade in high school, they pushed me to go to Washington, D.C., actually. And I was a member of what was called the Congressional Youth National Leadership Conference or Convention or something. But it was this Washington, D.C. visit for 3 months over the summer, and I would be, flying there and training with lobbyists in Washington. That blew my mind.
Wow,
I had no idea that I was going to be surrounded by all of this of policy making and being able to communicate and talk with legislators who are actually forming bills and forming all this legislation that I didn't really understand all of it until I made my appearance there in D.C. during this program. I went there twice, for 2 summers in a row. And my parents were very, very strict. You are doing this. And I kind of was ready because I knew for a fact that I did not want to be in Mississippi. I did not like it in Mississippi. I felt limited. I felt everything about the area that I was growing up in, including the students and the history and what I was learning. It just felt like I was missing out on something outside of the state of Mississippi. So they pushed me hard to get out of the state and experience other areas and other social villages, if you will, outside of the state of Mississippi. And I was so grateful that they pushed me and allowed me to go out of town and go out of the state and go out of the norm of being a part of Washington, D.C. and that component. I didn't necessarily like politics, so to speak. I really didn't know, what my role would be.
Did you think of yourself as a political person by any stretch?
No. I did not think that I was political. I did enjoy sports. For some reason, that was really sort of like my my passion outside of the music, of course. I absolutely loved music. You'll find pictures of me with a record or something in my hand as a kid, as a baby, all about music. And my parents, enjoyed that about myself too. And I would go into these talent shows and I'd do those, the dancing and all of that. But I loved being athletic. I loved being active. I loved being outside. I loved the athleticism of it all, which I was under the impression that I was wanting to do something. I knew I wanted to do something that was going to be powerful, that was going to be compelling, something relevant to change our community. I wanted to be a part of that. My parents and my grandparents really, really forged that philosophy, that thinking of helping others who can't help themselves, looking at the whole grand picture of things. I noticed that they would always make sure that I was, reading and not meditating, but memorizing James Baldwin and all these different kinds of poets that really kind of made sure that I looked at marginalized communities of Mississippi and how I can what I can do to change all of that. I didn't know what role I would play, but they really were instrumental in helping me navigate those thoughts in my mind. And as I pushed through my high school years, I figured that's what I kind of wanted to get involved with, which was why I was nominated to go into the Naval Academy as a senior in high school. For some weird reason, though, my grandfather did not want me to be in the military. Just before he passed away, he reached out specifically and gave me a phone call. And I was so excited because I think, in the second portion of the process. It was a lot of interview. I remember interviewing and taking tests. And I think on my second sort of iterative process of meeting Ray Mabus, who was the governor at the time, I was just getting ready to go and sign something or another, but my grandfather phoned me, and mere weeks or so prior to him passing away. But he mentioned to me, I know you're going to do what you want to do, but I really don't want you to get involved in the military.
And what do you think your grandfather was thinking for his reasoning why? Because having been a World War II Korea War veteran, era veteran. The GI Bill, all of these different ways that, the state had been making allowances for veterans to kind of get ahead, but not the same for, a black soldier versus a white soldier. So I'm curious.
Absolutely. And he passed. He passed on some level, when they were talking about the complexion of people's skin. My grandfather was very light-skinned. And a majority, basically all of his brothers were also light-skinned. And so they were able to pass to get that GI, those resources. And so interestingly enough, that's how he was able to, manage to get that cleaners and form franchises within the Macomb area. He saw all of that, and he, experienced and he knew a lot of his brothers who went through even Vietnam, and there was something else that he felt like I would have a bigger responsibility for, and it wasn't the military. And I respected him, and I did not want to question him. I grew up in that era where, you don't question higher or elders or anything of that nature. If they say not to do something, you do it. And you don't do it. And I wish I could have had a moment to reflect and actually kind of interview my grandfather to find out why. I never really kind of found that out. And I hate that. Nor did I wanted to even communicate and talk with my grandmother. My grandmother had probably stories all over the place. But for some reason, she did not want to communicate or tell any of those stories. Maybe it hurt. Maybe it was really kind of, it hurt their being, so to speak. And they didn't want to bring all those things up. And because we constantly wanted to find out more and probed, but they really did not want to go there. They did not want to communicate any of their stories. And then they passed away. But I'll never forget that phone call with my grandfather and him being very adamant, do not do this.
A couple more questions from this earlier period in your life. Along the lines of, you just don't question your elders, and also like the level of expectation that I can tell that your grandparents and your parents set for you. How did you handle any pressures that may have come with that? Any struggles internally as you're sort of looking to live up to their expectations to make something of yourself? How did you work through that?
Well, I obtained my gray hair early in my life, and I just sitting here thinking, man, that's probably why I was so gray at 14 years old. I was undergoing a lot of pressure as a young black kid growing up in Mississippi. I knew that I wanted to make something very special of myself. But I was seeing things. I was watching these films, the Ku Klux Klan and, Mississippi Burning was coming out. These really intense movies started to appear. I think at one point there was some murders happening in Atlanta. I was on some level scared to even go out because that was happening at the time. I was also trying to get in AP courses. The district was trying their best to come up with all kinds of excuses not to allow me to take some of these AP courses. But my mother, she don't take no for an answer. Just apply or go in and just act like you deserve to be there. And I did. I finished. Again, just a lot of pressure of being that only black kid that was trying to have some sort of academic piece of the pie. And the district was doing anything and everything in their power not to allow that. There was a very big, nasty fight that even went to the media in coverage where this particular white student was trying to get salutatorian honors. that would kick me out because there were two other white girls who were wanting to get the valedictorian. Those two white girls had a 4.04. This one white girl had a 4.02, which qualified her to get that salutatorian. I also had a 4.02. Had I taken AP English, I would have got that 4.04. But I don't know why I didn't get a chance to take that AP English. Maybe the class had, I don't know. But we found out in terms of investigation that my mother pushed. The 4.02 white student had just transferred in the 10th grade. So those grades didn't compute because she was a transfer student. So I ended up getting that salutatorian honor with a 4.02. It was those kinds of pressures, Will, and then kind of getting involved in trying to figure out if I wanted to get into the military or not, what schools did I want to attend, all of that was really pressuring me. And there was also another component because I didn't necessarily find any kind of role models or anyone that I can kind of reach out to and talk to about that, only because of me being the only child. There was, within our community, there was this one particular gentleman who acted a certain way, who just kind of carried himself a certain way that was very effeminate. And not that it fascinated me or anything of that nature, but I always found him to be just interesting. And he would go into the cleaners. I remember because I would always kind of help out and work at the cleaners at times and help out as much as I possibly could. But he would come in and flaunt and sashay around there, and everyone just kind of gave him this look. But he was just so strong-willed, and he didn't care. I admired his attitude only based on this notion of him not caring how he looked or how he felt or how he walked. That's what I was sort of like just magnetized by. But I really didn't, I was laughing with my cousins and laughing at my family. They were kind of like, there he is with this lipstick and high heels. I couldn't understand all of that because I'm thinking to myself, why do you have to go through why did you have to do all of that to get, and I'm thinking to myself, he's just trying to get attention. He's just trying to get attention. But what I did admire about him is his ability to just not only take control of the room or wherever that he was in, but he just didn't care. And I just wondered to myself, where did that come from? How did he come to this sort of discovery within himself to act that way? But to me, I really kind of didn't think anything of it. But I felt even just going through my life and then going through even college at Prairieview, which was a very interesting decision there of going to an HBCU.
We'll come back to it.
But I just felt like something was missing because I felt different. I was dating a lot of girls when I was in grade school and in high school, really. My parents were, very much so like, Please be a social butterfly. We love that. And I enjoyed meeting people and that kind of thing, but I wasn't about sex. I wasn't about going out and dating or anything. I just wanted to hang out. I just wanted to relax and enjoy myself, but not to the extent of dating. And I felt like something was missing because I couldn't get intimate. I couldn't feel a certain way towards women. But again, it was just one of those situations where I really wish I could have talked to someone. And as a young black kid growing up in the South, not really having anyone to kind of bounce these ideas off of or even talk about it, I just felt scared. I didn't want to talk to anyone. So I just suppressed it. I just pushed it down. And even that, I used academics, I used books, I used anything and everything to not allow me to think about any of that. I even used, sports. I even used football. Man, was I a beast on the field.
What did you play?
Defensive end, outside linebacker. And I absolutely loved it. It was something, I love defense, and I think a lot of it, even just sitting here thinking about it, I needed to hit something. I needed to tackle. I needed to just kind of take all of this frustration out on people. And we were champs. I mean, we were, our high school football team, Macomb High School, was really running things on a football level. And a lot of that had to do with a lot of my performances on the field. We had a really good, strong defense. Still, have good friends who are, I connect with on Facebook. We had this sort of camaraderie, so to speak. But I noticed, and it was probably, unfortunate, but I noticed that I put a lot of my energy and frustration on the football field.
Now you had other outlets as well as a teenager, and I'm wondering. I know in my research that at a very young age you start DJing, you start being a voice on radio. Is that right?
Most definitely, thanks to my mother. When I got back from D.C., after school, I made sure I participated in everything: band, debate, FBLA, whatever. I needed to be a part of something, and I did. One aspect of it was that I realized very early on through my father that I needed to make some money because I was always asking for some cash to go to Main Supply Record Store to buy music. And he's like, look, you're going to have to find a job. You got to do something because, my allowance is not enough for you to always go to the record store. So my mother, she worked at Kelwood, a lingerie department. She was like the accounts payable supervisor. They were talking in some sort of break room or something about some wife's husband who needed help at a radio station. And they just needed someone to just kind of monitor the FM side of things in terms of like changing out reels, that kind of thing. My mom came to me and was like, you know what, they said that they're looking for something at the radio station. There are two radio stations. The AM station, which was Constant Country, WAKK, and the FM station, which is this massive 100,000-watt WAKH, K106, top 40. When I first got there, I was in heaven, of course. Like, I had no idea, and I'm in the 10th grade, mind you. So they put me on WAKK, and they're like, your voice sounds kind of interesting. Let's see what you can do. I shadowed one of the DJs. Again, this was when I was coming out of school. I had a free moment. I had no practices or anything. It was I think it might have been on a Tuesday. So I went there. I shadowed this DJ. He was putting, the needles on this Dolly Parton, these 7-inch record, the singles. And he'd get on the air, and I'm like, man, this looks amazing. And he's like, well, we're going to go to this something or another, this program, but we want to give you a little test and record some things. I blew him away. I've always listened, Will, to Wolfman Jack, people like Casey Kasem, Rick Dees, and even Dick Clark. I mean, these people I would religiously love and listen to and study almost. And I'd get on the air, that was the latest from, Conway Twitty or whatever. And they're like, we love you, but you've got to sound a little more twangy. We need a little more twang so that we can make sure our audience is going to be. Mm-hmm. So they still kept me because they needed some support, but they also wanted me to go on next door to the top 40 station. And that's where I got all my experience in working on weekends as an on-air personality. Mm. And I got a Fast Eddie moniker because I picked up things very quickly. I was on the air. classmates were calling in and getting dedications played while I disguised my voice, of course. No one knew that was me. And all this was happening after 11 p.m. They eventually put me on the weeknights. So after 11 p.m., I was able to get on the air for 2 hours, and then I had to pop out of there at 1 o'clock, and they had whatever. I think they signed off or something. I can't remember. I mean, it was so back in the day. But I had my moment. I had my share as a 10th grader and 11th grade. I worked there up until I graduated from high school.
Yeah, based on what you learned in that experience, what has stayed with you in radio, even from those early days?
That notion of not wanting to be seen. I felt like radio was extremely powerful. It tapped into an imagination unlike no other. And all the pressures that I was talking to you about earlier, all the violence and, the PTSD, if you don't mind me saying, of being a young black kid in Mississippi, all of that allowed me to have this openness of being on the radio and no one judging me, no one seeing me. And I loved that about radio. I loved being able to hide behind a microphone and no one judging me. I loved being behind a microphone and perhaps even talking like someone white and people gravitating to me, really taking some sort of I don't know why subscription comes to my mind, but I mean like capturing the moments of their day and saying, you know what, I'm going to listen to this gentleman do the trading post. WAKK had what was called a trading post, 12 to 1, and they allowed me to come on and help sell tractors and whatnot. People would, it was one of their most listened to portions of their day on WAKK because they loved how I presented and how I delivered a voice during those trading post days at WAKK.
Did you meet any of these listeners in person?
No, and I made sure that I didn't. Even like the guy who was the owner, they were making sure that I stayed, behind the mic, and they really didn't necessarily think that I needed to be out and about, in the public, because they just loved how I sounded. And there would be moments, I even distinctively remember moments where they would do these live remotes, ensuring that I stayed in the studio and I was the one on the air, and making sure that they had, Scott Harrison and all these, Elvis, these other people that worked at the radio station. They were the face of the station, and they would always ensure that I would be the one, running the board, being on the mic, that kind of thing. Which I kind of remember, it's like thinking off the fly. It's like, wow, something else was going on, and I didn't even know about, me being naive and me possibly even just kind of loving radio. I'll do whatever that needs to be done. But yeah, that was kind of like that dynamic.
Right. Before we get to Prairieview, talk to me about the Southern Baptist Church as an institution, how it structured your family's life, and what your relationship to the church was. And has it changed at all?
Yeah. I remember my parents, I think they were really, they were instrumental in that Southern Baptist Convention events. All that was happening when I was younger, but I distinctively remember them stepping away as well. It just seemed to be, I didn't follow it much, only because I was, like my mother, for sure. You are going to church. You are going to Sunday school. That was sort of like a regiment. Ifs, ands, or buts, you're going. And you're going to be singing in the choir. You know, my dad was in the choir. She was in the choir as well. So on that note, that was sort of like a requirement. I didn't really have any issues with it, but interestingly enough, when I was in the choir or when I would be sitting in the pews, I would take like the hymn book and I would just put some sort of like beat to some of the music, and I just kind of think about how these hymns would sound if they had more of a Run DMC kind of beat to it in the back. So I would be doing those kinds of things in my mind. But I digress. But I remember distinctively that my parents and perhaps even my grandparents, they were very instrumental in the early stages of those Southern Baptist conventions, and I think possibly even hosting some people from those organizations at their church, especially at Walker's Chapel in the early days. But I do remember them stepping back, and it was a lot of drama around it. I didn't really know what was going on, but I knew it was some drama. To just kind of nip it in the bud here, spirituality was just so important to me. And I think a lot of that had, again, it was another pressure point, a pressure cooker. I didn't know how to hold and preserve the thoughts of sin and same sex and all of that. I mean, I knew those thoughts were in my mind. Definitely didn't want to take action on them. But for some weird reason, I was still spiritual, and I still loved God, and I wanted to really kind of make sure that I did the right thing in His eyes, and I internalized those hymns, I internalized those gospel songs that I would listen to, and I did not know how to hold all of those thoughts. I would always hear people and pastors and ministers, in their messages, they're saying things of this nature of, we've all sinned. And I knew that for a fact, but I just couldn't really kind of grasp this notion of homosexuality. And I was still battling that and kind of trying to understand all of that as a kid. I had to figure out some way to live my life so that it's honorable in the sight of God, and still be able to suppress and not take action to the thoughts that was going on in my head relative to sexuality and sex and all of that. And again, thinking back, I had someone to blame to allow me to do that, to allow me to live my life so that I can suppress it, be a productive person in society, and love God. That person I could blame is Prince.
Say more about that.
It was something about the lyrics and the music of this gentleman that really helped push me through my life. He actually saved me on some level. And I'm trying my best not to be emotional about it, but there were pieces of his song. I mean, there's songs that when he came out, people seemed to question who he was. And, there's one song in particular, Controversy. And I think that song opened my eyes to a world of acceptance, but hidden, a hidden private acceptance. Perhaps it was just for me. But when I first heard that song, and I immediately ran to Main Supply Record Store and bought the single, I instantly loved everything that he put out. And I think there was a song when the album came out, the song Sexuality was, I think, the second track on that album. Just blew me away. I had no idea what was going on, but it just really, it was like a TNT explosion that what he's singing about and what he's expressing is exactly what I'm feeling. And I just couldn't understand. Well, at least I didn't want to figure it out, but it gave me permission. It gave me a sense of living my life so that I don't have to feel so bad about things. You know what I'm saying? Because when you think about it and when you're alone in your own thoughts, it can really kind of scare you and you don't want to do anything.
But it's still an internal acceptance at this point.
That's right.
Which has to come first.
Internal acceptance. It was an internal acceptance. Thank God for Prince.
His purpleness has a way, right? No, but that kind of leads me into the worlds of HBCUs, and I want to another institution, right? The HBCU is significant in your life. Before we started this interview, you mentioned family members attending Jackson State, and you are an alum of Prairieview A&M University. So tell me what the significance of HBCUs are to your family's story, and then what went into your decision to attend Prairieview.
My father went to Alcorn and played football. He had to back out because he wanted to take care of his mother, interestingly enough, who was in Mississippi in Macomb. Again, media really played a significant role in everything that I did, Will. And my parents made sure that, they were very protective, too, of the types of media that I was absorbing. If it was something educational, if it was something meaningful, they were on board. One show in particular was A Different World. I absolutely loved that show. From beginning to end, it just really kind of helped give me the assurance that with me leaving the U.S. Naval Academy, dropping that initiative and wanting not to be a part of it, man, there's another sort of component that is really exciting to me, and that's A Different World. Talking to family members and getting their insight on colleges and universities and what to do. And, my aunt, who had attended Prairieview as a chemical engineer, she had already been here. And I spoke to her at length about what she thought about the school. Prairieview really wasn't on my radar at all. I had my vision set on Washington, D.C., of course, and Howard University. Howard University in Washington, D.C. was the home of black entertainment television. I wanted to be a part of Robert Johnson and that whole arena. Donnie Simpson was another role model of mine that I really kind of favored and wanted to be when I was growing up. So Howard was who and where I wanted to attend. Based on our civil rights history as well as our family and the legacy of Howard, this is where I want to go. But applying for them, they were only giving me $3,500 in scholarship. I couldn't hack that. No, I needed some more cash flow. I visited Georgetown before I wanted to kind of get involved and try to figure out whether or not I wanted to really kind of go to a school such as Georgetown. I read about it. I looked up some insight. I just felt like something was missing. And again, I turned to A Different World, and I kept watching all these other organizations. I think they had some sort of episode about pledging in fraternities and all that. And I was saying to myself, man, I wonder what that's like. And so I talked to my aunt. She actually connected me with their engineering arena, and when I was getting ready to graduate, somehow or another, I connected with a woman by the name of Carolyn Oliver, and she was some sort of engineering. She worked with the dean, and she was communicating with the person that Dion Nobles, my aunt, she knew. And somehow or another, I connected with Miss Oliver. And she started talking to me about, if you come here and you go through this summer program, and you may not know what engineering is and all that, but if you go to this summer program and if you do well, a company is going to foot the bill for you. You don't have to worry about anything. So I was like, that sounds like a pretty interesting sort of deal, I went through the it was called a pre-engineering summer enrichment program called ECI, Engineering Concepts Institute, that Ms. Oliver was over and heading. And I applied. I came on board, and for 3 months, it was pretty interesting. It was exciting. I still didn't know if I wanted to do it or not. But after I finished, mind you, Will, I'm going to be honest with you. I was bored. I mean, it was fun, but I was like, okay. But I went through and I aced all the tests and everything, and they're like, oh, ExxonMobil is kind of knocking at the door. They're coming in and they're ready to pay for this entire schooling, but you're going to have to work for them every summer. I was like, all right, well, no. I really didn't think anything of it. I was like, you know what? I looked at my parents too, and I was kind of looking at it as a reward to say, you've looked over me, you've protected me. Now let me give something back to you for what you've done for me. You don't have to pay for anything for my schooling. This is my thanks to you. This is my gratitude of what you've done. And I kind of looked at it that way to them. They were gung-ho. They were like, yeah, we don't have to worry about anything. And, I don't think I had a vehicle in my freshman year, but I did have one my sophomore. I looked at coming here as, what the hell did I just do? Because as they were leaving, I was kicking myself because I'm like, I really want to be in a big city and there's nothing here. Cows. I think we passed some pastures, and it was just very, very nerve-wracking because I didn't know what I had gotten myself into. But when I went to our dorm and noticed that they did have a different world at Holly Hall, I sat down with a whole group of other people who were watching on Sunday night, and again, it just gave me that incentive to make the best out of this moment, make the best out of this experience. And lo and behold, there's KPVU.
Take us there. So you're an engineering student here.
Correct. Mechanical engineering. But
you notice this world of broadcasting, and
yes.
it's tickling some areas of your experience that you're like, I have some familiarity here. What are you feeling when you learn about and first encounter KPVU? Oh,
it was such an excitement. It was like someone instantly just injected me with energy and just, you can finally kind of bring your, even though I didn't know what I was bringing was a shtick, but I could bring what I was doing in Mississippi here to Texas or here at this college radio station. And that really blew me away. So much so that, I found it, freshman year. I walked into the office, and I think the receptionist at the time, she was on the phone talking to someone. And I said, and she's like, hold on for a second, can I help you? And I was like, I just read somewhere where your general manager, Dr. Lori Gray, is she in? I'd like to just talk to her. And she looked on the phone, and she didn't see her on the phone, but she's like, yeah, she's back there. Go ahead. Talk about security. I was like, I'm just going back there. It's not a problem. And I walked into her office, very, very respectful. I even had my resume, I think, and I might have had a tape or something. But she instantly looked at my resume and, unbeknownst to me, just looked back up and said, when can you start? It was unbelievable. And that's pretty much how she was able. It's almost as if she knew my passion and what I wanted to do. And so she allowed me to be on the air at first three nights out of a week. It was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 6 to 10. But eventually, over the course of me being on the air and all the communication students upset with me, I managed to have a Monday through Friday weeknight gig here.
And this is about 1991?
This was from 1991 to 1995.
And you mentioned Dr. Lori Gray. Right?
Yes.
She had just become GM of the station in 1988. So,
Wow.
Tell me a little more detail about what I know that she had a focus on serving students, and in addition to the larger KPVU community, we call it the Learning Lab, right, in HBCU radio, this responsibility to students to train them as broadcasters and to help them along their professional journey. What was this world that Dr. Gray had created in minute detail? Where is the station on campus? Like, what are you seeing in the room?
She was on some level, and to me, I don't think that people have given her props, her flowers, because Dr. Lori Gray, who's now a district court judge in Harris County, she was one of the Black Girl Magic judges from back in the day when they, all those, black judges were elected. She was one of them. Oh. She had her JD at that time, and she was extremely instrumental in bringing in Corporation of Public Broadcasting and building that partnership up for the first time at KPVU.
And why is that important?
It's important only based on the notion that can allow more grant money from the federal government to pop into the station. It just earth-shattering to think that she was the one who pioneered that whole partnership into KPVU. She was also the woman who pioneered National Public Radio. She brought in that contract and the whole thing of ensuring that KPVU would become an NPR affiliate. She brought in all of that. And there I was, had no idea. And she utilized that talent, and that's pretty much how KPVU was a force to be reckoned with in those early 90s stages. I mean, give me a break. People were popping in, these artists and record labels and whatnot. They would come to black colleges to tour and to break their artists on these college campuses. Not only did they perform, they made sure that they had a beeline to KPVU. The signal, not sure what it was at that time, but you could hear 91.3 FM on the outskirts of Beaumont. And I remember distinctively even going home, heading to Mississippi, and being able to hear that radio signal, that frequency, all the way down through I-10. And that was fascinating to me. And it also captivated my interest in that level of competition, if you will, wink, wink, because I knew that stations, urban stations in particular, were listening in and were really honing in on what was going on, this little station on the hill. We would have these homecoming events, thousands would attend, and those stations' head announcers would be hosts of these events. They would pop in and flock in, and with them being here, I'm almost positive they were cognizant of the fact that we were also a player, if you will, no pun intended, in the ratings of listenership. I distinctively remember Jodeci, which was an act that came out in 1991 at the time. They popped in at the Memorial Student Center. They were huge at that time, uptown label, but I remember them distinctively having an interview with the radio station. There I was with my microphone, right there, with Jodeci. And then another act, Layla Hathaway, and all these really amazing artists, Sounds of Blackness with Terry Lewis at the time, that producer. He would come to the campus. There I was with my microphone, And it was just an amazing experience, amazing time to be not only in the mix of college radio, but you're communicating and talking and having this energy with people that are making inroads on the radio. I mean, like big major artists. And I didn't realize that I would be doing all of that and trying to get a mechanical engineering degree.
Yeah, you hinted at a tension with the communication students coming as a mechanical engineering student.
Yeah.
What did you encounter, and how did you work through that?
They did not like me at all. They kept telling me, you're taking up the space and the real estate of us because we're trying to get jobs ourselves, and here you are, an engineer. You don't even need to be in this arena. But Dr. Gray, the hardcore supporter that she was, she can sense and smell something amazing, and she would not, look, he's staying.
He's fascinating.
He's not moving. We'll figure out some other kind of post or some sort of other position for you, but he's definitely not leaving. And I just really enjoyed. I kind of say it with a twinkle in my eye. I was there to help them on some level too, because I knew how to kind of get people's interests and interviewing and bringing in some amazing folks that were on the yard. I could recall bringing in even, political activists and having them come on the air and do some interviews during our 4-hour, 5-hour show, and giving pointers to the students that I was, that were my classmates. This is how I was able to, book this particular guest. This was the kinds of questions that I, was asking so that I can get them to admit XYZ. I was actually kind of helping them, or at least kind of giving them some insight when I could, as a result of being on the air as a radio announcer.
Now, you mentioned giving space to student activists or political activists. What issues did matter during your time on this college campus? What were people concerned about, talking about, raising hell about?
Let's see if I can recall some of those conversations. I know some conversations dealt with who was on probation in terms of the fraternities and sororities of the day and the campus and what was happening. I remember we were having some conversations surrounding that and notions of hazing and but I think a lot of our conversations did center around being in the South. What that means in terms of growing up and how to actually come up with ways of generating wealth. Why are we always being, marginalized? I mean, I remember us having, some really deep conversations. For some reason, Frank Jackson comes to my mind. He was a very interesting university official back in the early 90s here at Prairieview. I think I may have even brought in William Beckton. I think he might have been our president at the time. He was on the air, and we had some discussions with him. We definitely wanted to ensure that we had ROTC support, and they brought in some people to communicate what their issues were. I'm trying to kind of think of some specifics. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I do know that we were making sure that we were right there on the front lines when it came to voting. Who should we be supporting at that time? Issues related to the kinds of coursework that we were being that we were learning, what we didn't learn in high school, and now what we're thinking about, what those aspects of our history was neglected. We were mentioning and talking about all of that. I just felt like this was the epitome of what Black college radio should sound like, what it should look like. And we were really involved in at least trying to bring in more energy and more enthusiasm, because our football team wasn't bringing any of that. We were trying our best to be as engaging as humanly possible, because we knew that we didn't really have a lot that was happening on the campus that was enthusiastic for students. So we had to make sure that we had that entertainment arm. We had to make sure that we had to procure some kind of creativity or some sort of enthusiasm for the students to really get involved, to really get engaged, because we were losing so many games in the football arena, and even as an HBCU, people were kind of giving us the whatever as a result of us being that was another. We may have had some conversations about that, but it was very short. But we were trying to understand what that relationship was between Texas A&M and Prairieview A&M, and what that meant. We weren't getting a lot of support. But we didn't want to go too deep into it, only because we're part of the system, of the Texas A&M system. But we knew something was up, and we were actually trying our best to kind of figure all of that out. At any rate, we would also make sure that we, when homecoming came, we had those kinds of conversations as well with regards to the community. And
describe homecoming here on campus.
It was amazing. We had members of the band. They would come on. Any kind of event or activity that an organization that was invited for the parade, they definitely had a spot on the radio. We talked to them. We communicated and found out what their role was within the Waller County area or within the Prairieview city area, what their mission was. We were just sort of like that extra that outlet for our community, for Prairieview, and we ensured that everyone had an opportunity to get on the mic. Everyone had an opportunity to share. We were doing live remotes. Our engineer, I forget his name, but there was a full-time engineer on staff that whatever kind of live remote, whether if it was even in the city of Houston, he was there, and he mapped everything out for us.
For like football games with TSU.
Football games and play-by-play, we did all of that. That was that. Even though, unfortunately, we were losing some of the games, or all of the games, we made sure that just that spirit, the spirit of honing in our own legacy, our culture, and putting that and headline and highlighting that for everyone was our goal.
Yeah. And when it came to sort of public affairs programming on the station, or what you remember in terms of the national conversation or even international, I mean, in your college days, you're living through Rodney King meeting and the aftermath of that. You're living through the downfall of apartheid. You're living through the O.J. Simpson trial, right? These kinds of national moments, are they addressed by the station? Is that a part of the public affairs discussion?
Yes, absolutely. And it was tied into the music. We were making sure that, not only did we include those kinds of, conversations and dialogue, we had to make sure that, at the end of the day, we captured what it meant to be at a black college. And I think that verdict came down when I might have been interning, when I was somewhere at Exxon or doing something. But I remember bringing it back up when I got back on the air, when I got back on the yard. And that, it exposed, or at least allowed us to, really engage with our students. Many of those students really wanted to pursue law. They would come on and, not only just, our communication majors, but we wanted to ensure that we could bring in, law students who might have had some issues or some conversations with their own sort of organizations in their department, have them on the air, have them discuss some of those, what it meant with the verdict. And
you're talking about OJ?
Yeah,
Okay.
with the OJ verdict. And we would, that was we also had conversations about the entertainment, like the media, the movies that would pop up. There was a lot of it just seemed like there was
Malcolm X.
Yeah, there was Malcolm X, there was Boys in the Hood, and South Central,
Juice, all these.
Juice. We had all these discussions about black men, I really felt honored on some level to be in a situation where I can talk about what it means to be a black male in America.
What did it mean to be a black male in America?
It just felt like, movies like that, like South Central. There was another movie, not Boys in the Hood. I can't, what is that? It may have been Dead Presidents, but it was something in the early 90s. What was that movie?
New Jack City.
New Jack City was when I first got here. What was the name of that movie? Not Boys in the Hood. Can't think of it right now, but I remember it causing so much uproar.
It was Cooley High.
No, that was in the 70s.
Oh, sorry. Shows my knowledge.
What is that movie? I see that guy. Can I look it up right quick?
Sure. Yeah. It's not The Substitute, is it? I remember Morgan Freeman have one. But I think as you're looking that up,
Dead Presidents.
I'm realizing how important popular culture is in sort of shaping identity. And when we're having this sort of moment of black cultural flourishing.
Menace to Society.
That
movie was just, it was just unreal. And I could distinctively remember, multiple nights of dialogue with classmates and students. And this was a moment where we could talk about that, right? We had conversation, and we had that dynamic where we can just kind of discuss why we had issues with an ending or what was going on that allowed many of us to be frightened. I think, fast forward, people were giving people like, Biden and, the Reagan, not Reagan,
Bush.
The Clintons such a bad vibe because they had called out
Sister Soldier.
Yeah, all that BDP, it was just a massive Public Enemy. All that was just.
But again, it's culture.
Yes,
it's black culture. It's mass culture. It's popular culture.
And we talked about all of that on the air.
And
it was mesmerizing.
Now, do you see, is there a departure from, I'm thinking about, your parents' generation and what they're learning from their parents' generation. And you're in this moment of just sort of black cultural flourishing. Identity and representation are the thing more so, I feel like, than politics that drove the movement activism. But it's still there. But I'm just curious, how do you see that time in black culture and protest?
Actually, you mentioned the word flourishing. That's what we were so upset about when we were having these discussions. We were actually upset that our lives were all about violence and black men shooting other black men. And, we were, why can't we have rom-coms? Or, why couldn't we have these sort of, experiences of love and And why couldn't we have those moments? We were always highlighted with gun violence, shooting each other. A majority of all those movies back in the early 90s really reflected the black male as this hardcore monster who needed to be killed because they had no kind of discipline, whatsoever. They always dealt drugs. We talked about that at length.
So how did that shape how you wanted to talk about the black community when you sort of left Prairieview and you eventually entered this world of radio? How did that experience and what you saw around you change how you talked about Black America and Black
That's
men?
a great question, because when I graduated, I did feel as if something was missing in my life. I knew for a fact of what I wanted to do, and I wanted to get involved in media. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be the male Oprah. Whatever that she was doing, I wanted to do it, but as a man. I wanted to understand what those gripes were. Why weren't we provided the same opportunities? And when we weren't provided the same opportunities, for what reason? Why were we overlooked? Why were we neglected? It just really fascinated me, but I couldn't quite grasp how to get there, because the people that I was asking how to get there, they kept telling me, "Oh, Eddie, you're going to have to go to Waco, Texas. You're going to have to go to some really small podunk.
Do some time first at a small station.
Yeah, at a small TV station, or even at a small radio station, and then work your way up. You got to do that, Eddie. No, to the left, Eddie. No." So when I graduated from Prairieview, I felt like I still needed to make some money. So I still kept in engineering, and I moved to Minnesota.
This is the 3M company, right?
This is 3M. And you would have absolutely no idea why I decided to move to Minnesota.
What'd you make of it?
I'm gonna ask you that question. Why do you think a black man who's fresh out of college, he probably could have had a job? I went to Arizona. I think I had some sort of aerospace engineering group. They wanted me to be there in Arizona. Of course, Exxon wanted me to work there, and I had a gig at the Baytown refinery waiting for me. I could have had any kind of job here in the South, but I chose Minnesota. Why? Guess.
As often happens, I think, in a human being's life, sometimes they chase love. They chase something that attracts them to a place. Is that the case?
I wanted to meet Prince.
So that love was His Purple Highness Prince.
It really comes back to that gentleman, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. I wanted to meet them. They were my role models. I can't believe that I didn't tell anyone this, and I think people who may not know me, or they may know me, they never realized that was the reason why I moved to Minnesota. For 3M? Absolutely not. I could have cared less about St. Paul. I had to meet Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. So I spent 3 years working at 3M, but I really actually didn't spend a lot of time in Minnesota. I was with the Optimized Operations Unit there at 3M, which meant that you were on this project management trek, and every 3 to 6 months you'd move to a different manufacturing site. So when I got to Minnesota thinking I was going to be in St. Paul, no, Eddie. They moved me to Petaluma, California, and I worked there for a bit. They put me in a project in Austin, Texas. I moved there and had a job in their manufacturing site in Austin. But it was a very fascinating sort of career, because my last couple of years with 3M, I managed to get to Dusseldorf and work in Germany. I had an amazing project leader who really pushed us to work in Germany, which was the most amazing project ever. International Logistics, Sue Campion. I absolutely love her. She was, again, another role model, but a white woman nonetheless. But she just really opened my eyes to the world, because all my life, again, as a black man, it was just kind of centered around the United States of America and what they did or did not do to help me succeed. She opened my eyes to a whole new world, and I thank her for that. But I know that the last year, as I'm coming off that Germany high, I had a project in St. Paul, and I met, actually, again, the spirituality still is integrated in my psyche, in my mind, in my life. I decided to go to a church in, I think it was in Woodbury, Minnesota. There I found that it was Gary Hines, who was their music director. He was instrumental for this group called the Sounds of Blackness. I love the Sounds of Blackness. Their motto of the song that was my theme song, everyone has a theme song, Will. And my theme song was Optimistic by the Sounds of Blackness. And so I had to meet Gary Hines. So I did some research and found that he was this music director at this church in east of St. Paul. I went there, and as soon as church was over, I went up to Gary, scared out of my jeans, because I didn't know what to tell me to go to hell or what in church. But as I talked to Gary Hines, he told me, Eddie, where did you say you worked? I said, well, I'm an engineer. I'm at 3M. Wouldn't you know that there's this young lady by the name of Renee McCall? She's our president. She's an architect there. You might want to say hello to her. I almost passed out. Immediately. It was on a Sunday, right? Monday morning, I went straight to the directory. Renee McCall. Found out that she was on like the 10th floor. I worked on the 3rd floor. I could not believe it. Immediately shot up to the 10th floor. I didn't see her, but I saw where she worked. I saw her desk. This nice little architectural kind of thing. Long story short, I met her finally, and we had lunch, and I couldn't believe that here she is, this Grammy award-winning woman that's a part of this amazing group called the Sounds of Blackness. Why are you an architect? And she was just explaining to me how, we live our lives just like everyone else. We have to have another, gig or whatnot. And I told her what I did with this optimized operations team. Lo and behold, I think I had another project somewhere else. But then when I came back, she had joined optimized operations and quit the department that she was in because she wanted to be a project leader for O2. And it just tripped me out because, who would have thought that she would be interested in what, my department was doing? And on the flip side, she helped me realize that, Eddie, if you want to do something in life, you got to go for it. You got to go for the gusto. She inspired me to quit 3M, use my 401k, and move to New York City. Again, I was thinking of D.C. and this, that, and the other. And she's like, no, go for the gusto. New York is the media mecca. It was a very emotional trip because I was like, you know what? I don't know if I'm going to afford, I'm the only child. My parents don't really have a lot of money. So I took out all my 401k and then moved to New York and went to grad school at New York University. And I think that's what opened my eyes to the journalism, to the media industry in and of itself when I moved to New York.
And had your parents react? Did they support you?
On some level, but they knew that, you're taking a very big risk because you're using your savings, a significant chunk of your savings or all of your savings to do something that's totally different. I worked at an engineering firm, ASME. I worked for them when I first got my gig, or at least when I got accepted at NYU. 3 Park Avenue, that was their address, and I worked there for 2 years. However, ASME Will was on the 20th floor. Guess who was on the 40th floor? Again, I had no idea. 3 Park Avenue, New York City.
Prince.
Almost.
Just kidding.
WBLS.
Okay.
One of the most, it is, when you talk of urban radio in the city of New York, WBLS is the urban mecca. Had absolutely no idea that I was going to be in the same building. So, of course, I ran the general manager there ragged because I told him that I really wanted to work there. His name just slipped my mind. But he hired Wendy Williams, and it was all of that because she was working in that building as well at that time. At any rate, as I finished ASME and I got this gig at CBS News, interestingly enough, working for Bryant Gumbel, his producer at the early show, my first gig there was 9/11. And that really is just sort of like hardcore, Eddie, you're in the fire. You're in the gamut. This is it. This is real journalism that you're working with. That really threw me for a loop. But even before going into that in 9/11, because I started there in 2000, I received a phone call from Minnesota saying that Renee McCall passed away. And I'm grateful that I had my own office, but I collapsed, and I couldn't believe that she had passed away. She was 36 years old, breast cancer. So I realized right then and there that I have to dedicate my whole life to media and journalism, whatever the case may be, in making sure that I be the conduit in storytelling and making sure I capture those key personalities, those key industry makers, those news makers, to come allow me to interview them and communicate with them, whatever the case may be, and put them on some sort of show. Like I said, I want it to be a black male Oprah. And I dedicated my whole entire career once she passed away to this media broadcasting world.
So what did you pick up in your 7 years at CBS Radio from folks like Brian Gumbel, and also stepping into the fire of a 9/11 and those major incidents? Take me through that.
Oh yeah, they taught me discipline. I remember going to the inauguration of Bush in 2000, traveling with Brian Gumbel on the plane, and he was a very interesting person to kind of have communication and dialogue with. And he mentioned something to the effect, I can't really kind of know word for word, but he had mentioned something to the effect of not giving up, not taking a lot of SHI, if you know what I mean. He lived his life off of people telling him, you're not going to amount to anything. He absolutely hated the person that I was working for, my supervisor, A.J. Warren. I'm naming names. He absolutely hated her. Why? Because, and I kind of realized what was happening when I left CBS News. To lightly put it, she was a piece of work. And it was a very interesting sort of dynamic to work with a woman like her, white woman. She was sharp, but she was extremely, she wasn't racist or anything of that nature. Maybe she was at some point, I don't know, but I know for a fact that she was hard-nosed. Like, you remember a character in Devil Wears Prada? That was her, not fashion, but more media and more journalism. And she was just, a bee, if you know what I mean, to work with. But I think I needed that. because you need someone like that, in my mind, especially you're so fresh into the world of television and media and broadcasting and a network at that. This is CBS News, for crying out loud. She hired Dan Rather. She was the woman who did that. I mean, she was just so hard-nosed. She didn't give a rat's ass or whatever, in terms of getting things done.
Well, sometimes women in positions of power need to be.
Wow, and she was very powerful. So I think her tenacity and what she brought to the table, though it was very disrespectful and intense, it was very good for me to kind of work under that, on some weird level. And to even communicate and work with Brian Gumbel, of all, people really didn't like him either. And again, that combined with my love for radio, because I also, when 9/11 happened, it really scared the bejesus out of me. I immediately just resigned and wanted to cut my contract. And my first gig after that was with WFAN, Sports Radio 66, which I absolutely had I think I sent them my resume in January of 2001. And lo and behold, God works in mysterious ways. When I left CBS News, WFAN was the next phone. They called me the next week. I have absolutely no idea how all of that transpired, but I worked for them for 7 years.
And WFAN, they folks don't know, is the preeminent sports radio station in the East Coast.
And not only that, it was hardcore talk. Mm-hmm. It allowed me to sharpen my skills. It allowed me, we put sports aside for a minute, but the people that are now working in the industry, Kevin Burkhardt, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank. There's so many names that used to work. They started at WFAN, and now they're doing all these broadcasts and all these television. They're there, and I worked with them as a result of being on WFAN for 7 straight years as a producer.
Yeah, but did you work with Mike Francesa?
Mike Francesa, Mad Dog. I'm thinking of Spiro, of course, Spiro Ditas. There was another. I just heard him this past Sunday. I'm so terrible with names, but practically many of those names that are now broadcasting on these NFL games, they used to work at WFAN. Mm-hmm. And it just makes me laugh that, all these cast of characters, I've worked with for 7 years over at WFAN. But even then, I was almost like a Jamaican man. I had, hustle when you're in New York City. I worked at New York One, the CNN affiliate, MTV. There was this Microsoft outfit called Global Communications Television. Worked with them as a media relations specialist. WNYC.
Did you ever cross
Sirius XM?
Did you ever cross paths with Dr. Carsonia Whitehead, Kay Whitehead, Dr. K, as she's known in the radio at WEAA?
I don't think so.
And I'm asking because for a time she was in New York at that same time, producing documentaries, working also for MTV. So, there might have been a chance that
it probably was, because I know I was with MTV for 2 hardcore years putting together this music subscription service called Urge. And it was going to be shaped from Real Networks and Rhapsody. Real Networks, Rhapsody ran out of money, and they laid off people, which pulled me out in 2008. So I worked there from 2006 to 2008. But those 2 years were phenomenal because we were putting together this music subscription service that was based on emoticons. If you're feeling sad, you go to this Urge platform, and there's a procured playlist specifically for if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling emotional, deranged, mental, if you're feeling like you're wanting to have some violence. There were 20 programmers all dedicated to putting and procuring these specialized playlists.
That's fascinating.
It was It was so much fun. We enjoyed it. But at any rate, that was MTV and that whole world. But after MTV came WNYC.
Okay, so yeah, take us back to public radio and how you entered the world.
And that's how I entered it. Yeah, I was at KPVU, of course, with the All Things Considered and all these shows that were were broadcasting from here at Prairieview. But it took me to go back to WNYC to get back into the public media world, and it was amazing. I had such I felt like working there. I was a kid in a candy store. Interestingly enough, WNYC gave me the chops, real journalism chops for radio, particularly. So much so that they supported me through, and no one had done this before, but they have a performance space called the Jerome Green space, which I'm thinking it's still there. It's still active. But they allowed me to host this show called The Global Salon. And it was an amazing trip, if you will, where it lasted, I think it might have been like a summer or something, but like each month or perhaps every 2 weeks, or I can't remember, but they allowed me to procure these international shows where whatever country that we were focusing in and honing in on, I had the ability to bring in a panel of whether if it's a political activist, some sort of journalist, a musician. We would come in and have these really difficult conversations about how to solve whatever kind of catastrophe that country had gone under, that they were experiencing. What were some solutions, and how can we get those communities healed? From Brazil to Poland. I think at one point there was some sort of terrorist attack that had happened at that time. We brought in something that was responsible for Korea. And these shows, Terrence Blanchard from New Orleans, we talked about Katrina because I think Katrina had hit at one point. He came in and not only were these discussions, but it was part discussion, part performance. And we had these, massive musicians come in and perform for the audience. Many of these shows were sold out. It was amazing. I had such a great time, and I really want to kind of bring it back. But it was called the Global Salon. And WNYC, really, and Indira Etwo, who I think she's now a very big curator of a building over in Brooklyn. She's doing a lot of space. She's doing a lot of work, some great work there in that space in Brooklyn that she's working on. There were people along my journey that very much so had my back. They took risks, not knowing who I was, but saying, you know what, we value your expertise and your experience so much that we're going to put you out there and we're just going to see what happens. And it was amazing. I was so grateful to her and WNYC for giving me that space, for giving me that arena, if you will, to play. I mean, these were like moments for playground for me to be in media and to work in New York City.
And you had the resources.
Yes, the resources up the wazoo. I mean, whatever, and people that you wanted to book. It's WNYC. It's New York. Yeah, I'll be there. He was like, wait, do you have a band? Oh, I can find band members. Not a problem.
And how'd you get along with your colleagues? You crossed some paths with Brian Lehrer and others.
Absolutely, they were fantastic. And I remember, once I finished there and moved back to the South, Brian Lehrer, many of the producers, and even like the general manager, not the program directors, they were always calling me. Can we get you on this spot to talk about Harvey? And, can we get you on to talk about whatever? It was very. I knew for a moment that I did not want to burn bridges there because it was amazing. The reason why I left was I was missing my family. I was missing my Southern roots. For some reason, I felt like I needed to establish a family. I didn't think that I could do it in New York, the concrete jungle. For some reason, I still wanted to have a son or a daughter or something in my life. I wanted to have a family of my own. These kinds of thoughts started coming to my mind, Will.
Sure.
The homosexuality started popping in. I was thinking to myself, what is going on with my life? Where am I going to be? I don't know what's going on. And I felt like I needed to at least get away from New York. But one of my colleagues at WNYC noticed that Houston had an opening at Houston Public Media, KUHF. I did not want to entertain that at the time because I was doing such great work at SiriusXM, so much amazing work that they offered to do a host of a sports show on their network, on their OutQ network. And I'm thinking to myself, if I accept this job, I'm not going to get that gig at SiriusXM, and this is huge. But interestingly enough, they basically said you could host the show from Houston. And I was floored. But it took a lot of negotiating because I wanted this sports show on Channel 88, NFL radio. And it would be the first ever sports talk radio show for the LGBTQ community.
Okay, tell me what that means. What does that look like? Yeah, it's a big deal.
No, so I talked to the director of sports programming, Steve, what is his name? Interestingly enough, he used to work at WFAN. Steve Cohen! Boy, do I miss Steve Cohen. He gave me an ultimatum. He said, Eddie, I will pay your salary, but you will not be on Channel 88. You're going to have to go on OutQ, but I will pay for it. And I was like, yeah. I felt like having an LGBTQ show on Channel 88 would be revolutionary. And I think on some level, not only Steve, but I think many people thought that I would be on talking about the uniforms of what they're wearing and they thought that it wasn't going to be sports centric. It was going to have something that wasn't really sports that I was going to be talking about. But in essence, I wanted to still communicate and talk about sports, and I wanted to highlight why we weren't communicating or at least having these discussions about openly gay athletes that are very well playing on these teams. And I wanted to be a bit controversial. I wanted to talk to Warren Moon and communicate with him about why two players on his team, when he was playing in 1993, two gay players, why they didn't come out and this, that, and the other. Those kinds of discussions. But he didn't want to have it. He was like, nope, people, we're not going to look, I'll pay for it. And he was like, as a matter of fact, you can come on SiriusXM and host your own show, but you're not going to talk about gay. Nothing gay. So I was like, all right, well, I'll accept this job at KUHF, and then I'll do my gig at SiriusXM. I did that for 4 years, 2 years? I think it was 2 years. It was 2 years that I had the outfield. And I knew that they were going to pull the plug. Something just felt I got a phone call, and this was in 2016, 2017, somewhere in there. I saw the vice president of Talk, Serena Cadilla. She calls me up, and I said, Serena, is my show canceled? She's like, Eddie, no, the outfield is not canceled. But the network your show is on is canceled. You have open season to talk to other channels and bring in the outfield. It's a great show, but it won't be on OutQ. And to me, I felt like you needed to be at Avenue of the Americas in New York City to have these meetings and discussions in person with these people. There's nothing I could have done from Houston to get these channels to pick up the outfield. And at the same time, I was really making inroads with KUHF. I did not have a producer. For 2, maybe even 4 years straight, I was working at KUHF without a producer. Interestingly enough, and I don't want to prolong this, but there were so many, I don't want to say racist things, but there were some very tumultuous activities that happened at KUHF that was extremely pressure cooker material. And that was one in particular where for 2+ years, they did not hire a producer for me. I came on board as their morning news anchor. We're talking, hardcore rain-ish, all flooding, all kinds of breaking news, all kinds of catastrophes that was happening here in the city of Houston. And I had to muster and do everything. And I bitched and moaned and yelled to the top of my lungs for 2+3 years, asking them, I need support in the morning. Eddie, you're doing such a good job. We don't need anyone else. You're fine. Don't worry about it. And if I were someone else of a different complexion, I think it would have been something totally different. Mm-hmm. That was just one of the multitude of examples that I could sit here and discuss with you, which I'm probably going to just hold on to for my memoir. But It was so tumultuous working in that environment.
I want to be respectful of your time, but I have some significant questions to ask towards your life. So I'll try to streamline it as best I can.
Apologize. This is
just tell me.
Going long.
Can you just tell me what it felt like when you did come out publicly about your sexuality, maybe with your parents, and what you had to work through, and what it felt in that moment?
2007. That was the year of the inevitable. I made a phone call to my parents, and I probably shouldn't have done it to my parents over the phone. But I felt like I needed to do it because at that time I had been seeing someone. It's so funny that when you experience love and you meet someone, those emotions really sort of kind of pushes you to do something that you probably wouldn't have done had you not been in a relationship to begin with. Mm-hmm. But I think we had split up, but we became friends, and I really wanted him to be in my life because he saved my life. And I think that was kind of why I decided to come out to my parents, because that previous year in 2006, I found myself on the BQE expressway overhead bridge wanting to jump. And thinking about that whole incident with my best friend, Peter, telling me, or at least giving me some advice as to that not being the solution, he instilled in me that I really needed to have this conversation with my parents because it was eating away at me. Why? Because family means the most to me. As I lived in New York City for almost 20 some odd years, I really missed my family, and I wanted to be there. I wanted to be back with my family. And so fast forward, I figured that was the best thing to do for me to come out to them. And I made a phone call. After that phone call, they shut me out. They shut me out for a whole year. Didn't want to communicate, nothing. And I tried to live my life, but I just couldn't. It was very difficult. When you're alone and no one to talk to, it was very painful. But it was my father A year later, I think that right around the time Obama became president, he was the one who pushed the envelope and really reached out to me for the first time and said, "We love you. Come home." And I applaud my dad for doing that. If it weren't for him, I don't know how my life would have unfolded. But I admired his courage, or at least his audacity, if you will, to pick up the phone and call me and say those words. And then fast forward, communicating, and it just felt great finally having some sort of conversation with my father about all of this. For some reason, I felt like it was important for me to hone and preserve my relationship with him, more so my mom, which was weird. Maybe it's not, but I just felt like my father has been so important to me. And for some reason, I wanted his blessing. I wanted him to feel as if, I'm the same kid. I'm the same young baby that he raised. Nothing has changed. And I promised him, I think what really kind of hurt him was the fact that he wasn't going to be a granddad.
Well.
And I promised him at that moment, at that time when we had that discussion, I said, "Dad, we could still have kids. Are you kidding me? I promise you'll be a grandfather someday. I promise you."
So let's talk about that, because you've also been on a journey yourself to become a father.
Yeah.
And I know you have a surrogacy journey. So if you could share a little bit about, I know we only have so much time, but if you could share a little bit about what that's been like and what you've learned from it and how rewarding it's been.
I can truly say that being general manager of KPVU right now has given me the power, the energy, and it's given me this push to move forward, to push forward as a result of going through that surrogacy journey. I don't think there's anything in my life that has been more stressful, more pressure cooker. I mean, this was 3 years of just pure, unadulterated hell, because you don't know what's going to happen with the pregnancy, or even if you're going to have a kid, for one. And two, there's so much money at stake, so much money happening. And it could be lost instantly. And three, the disgust, the talk about racism from the 50s and the 40s. There's a whole new group of individuals that do not want you to go through this process, and they wish ill on you, and they do not want you to move forward with anything as relates to a gay person having a child in this capacity. And they're all coming from the religious sect, which trips me out even more. But
right, because of the focus on the family idea.
Yes, absolutely. And just combine all of those three elements. It's a wonder that I'm still sitting here, but it was the most rewarding journey ever. Because right now I have this beautiful 4-year-old. It took a long time for me to come to grips with it, but he was indeed a miracle child. I don't know if you know about surrogacy, but it is extremely rare for one healthy embryo to go through that whole fertilization process, to go and make sure that this embryo takes. I think that's the terminology for it. But there's 2 women involved. The donor for the eggs and the surrogate. I call her the oven. But I'm not going to go into the process in and of itself. But to let you know that those two women that are in the process, not only are they compensated, but legal fees, medicines, agency fees, all of that. It was unreal the amount of money that it costs to do this journey. And to think that the next day, the next week, the next month, it would have been wasted because nothing could have taken. But this baby, one shot at love, one embryo, one healthy embryo, and it came out.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And she was pregnant on my birthday, November 27th, 2020. And
what a time, 2020.
Yes. And that was all with regards to George Floyd and all of that. I had just won the green light from KUHF to have ICU, to have that show.
That's what your program was called.
The radio show and podcast. And interestingly enough, Will, it's a good 180-degree shift in coming up with that title, because now I felt like I was being seen. Being on the radio, doing all of this work, it really felt like this was something that I was destined for to begin with, because all my life I've been trying not to be seen. But to come up with a show called ICU based on this notion of giving a voice to the voiceless was powerful. And I wanted this to be in some sort of show format.
I want to ask you about what you see as the legacy of that program in 2025, but I know we're running short. So what I'm going to kind of ask is, you've returned to Prairieview A&M University and KPVU as general manager in the last year or two. I want to get a sense of the station you encountered coming back and just sort of the vision that you sought to implement as the general manager here.
Ooh, I was very shocked to learn that. I actually thought that the station was in great standing, and I would have put my hands in the air and said, if you all have someone else that you want to lead this radio station, by all means, have at it. But I was shocked to learn that when I first reached out to the woman who I worked with at KPVU, she was the promotions director at the time. Her name is Carol Campbell. She now works in the president's office here in special events. I first reached out to her to kind of get a sense of, what's going on at KPVU? And I was shocked to learn that, she basically told me, actually, Eddie, there's nothing going on at KPVU. You want to come on board? I was like, are you kidding me? I thought that they had everything straightened out. But lo and behold, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with the president, and I sat down with her, found out, what was happening with the station in and of itself, didn't realize that the previous general manager had passed away.
John Hughes,
and it just blew me away because I thought that the station was operating, in true colors. Then, it was fantastic. Little did I know that, no, that wasn't the case. And the department head of the station that houses KPVU, she had been out of town or out of the country at the time. She wanted to connect with me, once she got back into the States. Had a conversation and a meeting with her. They mentioned that they had a couple of other gentlemen doing some sort of GM search or something of that nature. But I mentioned to them how, look, I used to work at KPVU, and I worked in a situation where they had just started a lot of the work with the CPB and then also with NPR, worked with Dr. Gray. And, this would be an amazing opportunity for me to really kind of, hit the ground running with KPVU. Little did I know that, this was like, oh my, yes, Eddie, we're ready. Come on. And then I get on and I realize, oh my goodness, there's no staff and there's really nothing going on here. Really nothing. And this past the 16th of December was the anniversary year of me being on as general manager at KPVU. It really has been a roller coaster of a labor of love, only because the students that are here are feeding me. They're fueling me. I have not experienced such enthusiasm and energy from students unlike anything for radio. And that has really been just amazing to experience. Secondly, though, there's so much that has to get done and is happening as we speak, as it relates to the education piece of what it means to be a college radio station at an HBCU. And since John Hughes's passing, there's been a re-education that I've had to have undertaken. And we're talking about, not only creating outreach outside of Prairieview, but here on the campus in and of itself. One particular department basically said, oh, I just thought you guys just did homecoming and the parade. Like, no, we're so much more than just the homecoming parade. We are the voice of the entire university. And I've spent a great deal of time ensuring that from a technical aspect, we are on the air. And that's what really matters the most to me, because we've got to ensure that we've got compliance issues to really hone in on, and the quality of the actual broadcast. As an engineer, I am so grateful to have that mechanical engineering background, because it has allowed me to understand what we need, not just from a programming standpoint with music, no, not just programming in terms of underwriting and sponsorship, no. We're talking, excuse me, we're talking the ability to purchase power supply modules, getting our transmitter back up and running, making sure lines that hold the tower are inspected and are in place, compliance issues with the EAS. There is so much that needs to take place before anything as relates to what the station will bring once it's operating and once it's up and running. So this year that I've had the opportunity to work in, man, it's been a heavy lift. But it really has allowed me to step away from the microphone, so to speak, and really just focus in on ensuring that the foundation needs to be where it is. We're talking website, we're talking app, making sure that the digital interfacing, all that has to work solid, including the technical aspect of the entire station. I am so just excited for the future, because there's so much that needs to happen from an audio engineering standpoint, spatial technology that I want to bring into this crew, our AI means of allowing us to sweeten certain audio with those AI features and bringing those in. There's just so much that we can do, and there's so much potential that I'm extremely excited to be in this position to do that. And I'm grateful that I have this opportunity, and I'm here in my element. This is my lane. I've always wanted to be a part of a Black ownership platform. And this is the closest thing there is when you mention Black ownership. And that's radio at an HBCU college radio station. And I love that mentality, right? I love thinking along those lines of saying, this is my moment to ensure that we have this ability to preserve our richness, to preserve our culture, to preserve our experiences through audio. And what better way to do it is through KPVU and allowing the students to have their moment of storytelling, guiding them, leading them to making sure that they have the ability to be compelling, to know exactly what needs to take place. I actually find myself being in those roles of the Bryant Gumbels, the A.J. Warrens, the people that gave me a hard time not wanting to be that badass with them, but knowing what the end result looks like is something that I cherish the most, because I've seen success and I've seen those accomplishments, and I know what they smell like, I know what they look like, I know what they feel like. And it's about time that we really hone in on what that looks like and create that recipe for our students here. And that's kind of where I am with now, with working here as general manager.
And you mentioned the power of this Black-owned enterprise. What is it about Black radio that is different from other forms of media and communication? What does Black radio speak to?
It speaks to our culture. We have got to preserve the richness of its legacy. And in my mind, that's what A Different World was doing, only on television. I'm looking at creating that whole sort of dynamic on audio, preserving our history, understanding what went down back in the day, having those voices come on our air. What kind of music was being played back then? What can that music sound like and look like today? I think in and of itself, Black radio from back in the day, even college radio from back in the day, shaped our heritage, shaped our music culture. And I remember working at KPVU in the 90s, where those stations were competing with what we were playing on the air, whether if it was a production piece or a music piece or some sort of play or whatever. Those urban stations, those commercial stations, they have their clients, their sponsors, and they're the ones who are really sort of paying their bills, because they have to succumb to whatever that the industry wants them to do. Payola still exists, whereas here at college radio, we don't have those limits. We're not sensationalized. We don't answer to anyone. We have the freedom, if you will, to create some amazing, compelling content and shape the culture that we live in, that we own and operate and we cultivate ourselves. And we're so grateful that we've got our race center that's within arm's reach, our archivists, we can go within arm's reach. They want shows on, we can create and we can curate those shows. We can preserve what's happening with our marching bands. We can create and preserve and create some things with our football and our sports and athletics. We can even curate and bring in our outreach of communities and and corporations that surround KPVU and have them be a part of our station. Who's to say that Daikin, the company that services our air conditioning unit at the transmitter site, hello, we're looking for an in-kind donation for a brand new air conditioner. What can you do for us? That would be amazing if we can actually have some sort of sponsorship with Daikin and have them on board. We just have this amazing operation that we've just scratched the surface, and we're just ready to just kind of take on all that we can with the resources that we can. But it's just going to take the fundraising arm, because that's what's really important to us right now. And again, that's our challenge, right? We're trying to make sure that we get as much as we can as far as support from our alumni, support from our corporations, support from, we are, at the end of the day, listeners supported. It takes them to keep us on the air.
Here we can learn from former station manager Dr. Lori Gray, who ran those radiothons. Right?
That's right. She was actually the first to actually bring those radiothons onto the radio station. And Carol Campbell was the pioneer of those radiothons. So grateful that we still have them to help as our guide, so to speak, our Luke Skywalkers for the radio station.
Yeah.
So we're definitely looking to have them lead us in those kinds of operations that's going to take us to where we need to be, with Carol Campbell and Dr. Lori Gray, to bring them on board to help us with these radiothons.
And then the last thing I'll ask is, what do you want your legacy to be for your 4-year-old? When you think back, how do you want to be remembered, Eddie?
That's a really hardcore question there. I didn't even expect to have it.
If there's one quality or one lesson you learned along the way, what do you want to tell your child as they enter the world?
It's all about endurance. It's all about making sure that I have to keep reiterating this for myself too. Not taking these negative thoughts of what people say and internalize them. No. Build your own lane and go for it. I mean, and look at it as if you are destined to carry it out. And that's what I've looked at my entire life, from growing up in Mississippi to where I am now here in Houston, with all those incredible experiences of living in New York City, which I believe to be, life's jungle. I mean, if you really want to experience life, live in New York City for a while, and then you'll experience it. But that's what I want to ensure that my son, my daughter, the legacy that I want to leave them is this spirit of endurance. Never giving up. That's what Renee McCall taught me, and keeping with what my focus was throughout my life when I was over at Minnesota. And to also just, subscribe to a vision that allows you to help others who can't help themselves, those who don't have that voice, those who have stories to tell but just don't have that platform to tell it. Be instrumental in helping them get their story out. Be instrumental in giving or providing the resources that they need to get their story out. Just be an inspiration, so that you can really feel good about what you've accomplished in life. So to me, that would be the legacy that I want to leave from my kids.
Thank you. So, we can't get to every aspect of an individual's life in a couple hours, but if there's anyone or any aspect we left out that you want to shout out in this moment, go right ahead.
Oh no, I'm leaving it all for my memoir. That was just the scratch of the surface. I've lived an amazing, just blessed life. So grateful that there are ancestors out there who are looking out for me. I know they are. It is so bizarre how things unfold in my life, and I'm just grateful that many of them are angels, and they've got me. They're supporting me throughout every decision that I make, and I think about them every minute of the day. So I'm just grateful for the ancestors. I know they're going to be there for me, and I'm just grateful that they're there to help guide me and lead me to the right decisions that I have to make in my life, so that I can continue to prosper. So I'm just grateful.
Well, Eddie, I really appreciate the time you've taken to share your story and contribute to the HBCU Radio Preservation Project.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for this opportunity, Will.